How does a man work for 40 years, save $32,000, and find himself broke and alone just 18 months after moving to a country where he thought he could live like a king? David thought he had discovered a secret that the rest of the world had missed, a hack for a comfortable retirement. But as he was about to learn, the math of paradise promised him freedom, while reality was silently calculating his total disaster. I'm going to find out what really happened when David moved to the Philippines to start over. This is a story about the danger of relief, the high price of loneliness, and the one expense that no YouTube budget video ever warns you about. To understand how David ended up broke in a foreign land, you have to understand the life he was desperately running away from. David was 66 years old when he finally walked away from his job. He didn't stop because he was ready for luxury. He stopped because his body and his mind had simply reached a breaking point. For over 4 decades, he had been a maintenance worker at a manufacturing plant in Arizona. Imagine that for a second: 40 years of the same building, the same machines, and the same soul-crushing routine. At first, that stability felt like a blessing, but somewhere in his late 50s, that predictability started to feel like a trap. The job never changed, but the hours felt longer, the heavy work felt heavier, and every single day became a mountain he just had to get through. By the time he hit 65, he wasn't looking at retirement as a reward, he was looking at it as an escape. But then he looked at his bank account. David's Social Security check was $1,100 a month. His rent back in Arizona, $900. Once you factored in food, utilities, and gas, he had almost nothing left for an emergency, let alone a life. He had $32,000 in total savings, the sum of 40 years of hard labor, and he knew that at home, he was one hospital visit or one car breakdown away from total ruin. He asked himself a question that many people his age are asking: if this is the rest of my life, what's the point? That's when the algorithm stepped in. Late at night, scrolling through his phone, David started seeing videos about the Philippines, promises of living comfortably on less than half of what he was currently spending. He watched people break down budgets where rent was only $200 to $300 and meals cost just a few coins. He did the math over and over in his head. If his rent dropped from $900 to just $250, his $1,100 check didn't look like a poverty sentence anymore. It looked like freedom. He spent 3 months researching forums and Facebook groups, and the pattern was always the same: if you live simple, you'll be fine. Filled with a mix of desperation and hope, David made a choice. He sold everything he owned, packed one single suitcase, and booked a one-way ticket. When he landed, the heat, the noise, and the movement of the city were overwhelming, but for the first time in years, it was exciting. He found a basic apartment for about 12,000 pesos a month, just over $200. It had no hot water and it was small, but it didn't matter because the math was finally working. His first month, he tracked every single peso. By the end of 30 days, he had only spent $750 total, including his rent. For the first time in his life, he felt ahead of the game instead of falling behind. He could buy groceries without a calculator. He could sit down for a meal without worrying about which bill he was forgetting. It felt like relief, but as David would soon find out, relief is dangerous when you've been without it for too long. Because once life starts feeling easier, you stop asking if it's actually sustainable. As the weeks turned into months, something else started creeping in, something the YouTube videos never talked about. The days started feeling long, really long. David didn't know anyone, he didn't speak the language. His routine became a loop: wake up early, eat alone, walk through air-conditioned malls to escape the heat, and go back home. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore, it was empty. There were entire days where the only words he spoke out loud were "thank you" to a cashier. He would watch groups of families laughing and friends eating together, and he realized he was always just passing through. The videos all focused on the money, but none of them talked about what it felt like to build a life from nothing. The cheap life worked, but it felt hollow. And that's when he met Lisa. It started small, just a familiar face at a place he frequented. She was the first person who actually remembered his order, the first person who talked to him like he wasn't invisible. She worked 6 days a week to support her family, and when they spoke, she listened with an attention David hadn't felt in decades. When he talked about his 40 years of maintenance and how repetitive those decades were, she didn't rush him. She asked follow-up questions. She made him feel seen. Slowly, his life started to feel different, not just cheaper but fuller. He had a reason to leave his apartment, he had someone to talk to. But this emotional connection was the moment the math began to change. The first time he helped her, it didn't feel like a big deal. Her daughter needed medicine, and it cost about $100. For David, $100 was nothing compared to the massive gratitude and the feeling of being needed that he received in return. It hit him in a way he hadn't felt in years. At first, it didn't feel like a pattern, it felt like separate moments of kindness. A little help with groceries here, covering a small bill there. Every expense felt reasonable on its own. He told himself, this is temporary, next month will be lighter. But next month was rarely lighter, it was just a different emergency. A new reason, a new expense, and every time saying no felt harder than saying yes. Because now this wasn't just a random person, this was someone he cared about. David stopped thinking in terms of totals and started thinking in terms of moments. This is helping her, this matters. And that's when the shift really happened. Once you stop tracking the numbers clearly, it's easy for them to grow. His monthly spending crept from $750 to $900, then $1,100, then $1,300. He was now spending more than his Social Security check every single month, dipping into his $32,000 safety net just to keep his new life afloat. Deep down, David saw the patterns. He noticed that the emergencies always seemed to happen right when he had money. But he was terrified to bring it up. He knew it was a massive emotional risk. If he was right and it was a scam, then the only connection he had was a lie. If he was wrong, he would hurt the only person who cared about him. So, when he finally did bring it up and Lisa reacted with hurt and confusion, he backed off immediately. He decided it was easier to believe the dream. His savings were no longer security, they were just something he was watching disappear. But he couldn't stop because pulling back meant risking the one thing that made his life feel worth living. By month 18, reality finally caught up. David looked at his bank account and realized his 40 years of savings had plummeted to less than $5,000. The safety net was gone. In a moment of fear, he sat Lisa down and told her the truth. He had to slow down and be more careful with money. And almost immediately, everything changed. The calls slowed down, the visits stopped. The connection, the thing David had spent thousands to protect, vanished instantly. He was alone again. Only this time, he didn't have the money to start over. He realized too late that he hadn't been building a life, he had been financing a fantasy. She had finished him off by taking his remaining security and leaving him more isolated than the day he arrived. Today, David lives in an even smaller, cheaper room than before, back to the basics of survival. He understands something now that he didn't before: the math only works if you remove everything that makes life worth living. The moment you try to add back connection, relationships, and purpose, the cost changes entirely. The biggest expense isn't always rent or food, it's the need to feel like you matter to someone. And if you don't factor that in, your retirement math will always be wrong. Back in the US, $1,100 felt impossible. In the Philippines, it felt like freedom, right up until he tried to build a real life on top of it. Surviving is one number, living is another, and for David, confusing the two cost him almost everything. Pause. What would you do if you found yourself in David's position? Is it even possible to find true love when there is such a massive wealth gap between two people? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you seen this happen to others, or was David just particularly unlucky? Subscribe for more cautionary tales and the unfiltered truth about what it's really like to leave everything behind.